That was a lovely introduction. This past year has been a year of death. Some people say 1 in 3 Americans, 1 in 3 at this point, have lost someone they love in the past year. Is one of those 1 of 3 you? If so, it is my prayer that I have a message that will encourage you this morning. This story doesn't start out very encouraging, though. When Jesus heard that his friend was in the ICU on a breathing machine, the first thing Jesus did was nothing. To be fair, I don't know exactly what I expect him to do, because aren't we all powerless in the face of death approaching? What could he possibly do? But still, nothing? Not even a greeting card? Nothing? I can't help but imagine Mary and Martha sitting by the bedside of their sick brother asking, "Where is Jesus? He should have heard the news by now. Where is Jesus? He's slipping away. Where?" It's already too late. After 2 days of nothing, Jesus suddenly decides it's time to go. "Let's go back to Judea," he tells his disciples. "Let's go and see Lazarus and his sisters." But going to Judea is no small deal. Going to Judea is dangerous. "Last time we were in Judea," says the disciples, "they tried to stone you. Every time we go to Judea, the people get more and more angry. If we keep going back to Judea, death is inevitable." "But our friend Lazarus," says Jesus, "has fallen asleep, and I've got to go there to wake him up." "Hang on a second," says the disciples. "If you think we're going to walk for 3.5 days just so you can tickle Lazarus's feet and say, 'Wakey, wakey, eggs and bakey,' you've got to get your head checked. If he's asleep, let him stay asleep. Lazarus needs sleep to get better." But the disciples don't get it. "I'm speaking metaphorically," says Jesus. "Lazarus is dead." "Well, if Lazarus is dead," protest the disciples, "surely it's better to stay here where you can be safe. And if Lazarus is dead, what can you possibly do? Nothing good can come of you dying too." But Jesus is determined. "Fine," says Thomas, as he reluctantly ties up his sandals. "I guess we're all going to go with you so we can all die with you." Jesus and the disciples show up at the town, and Lazarus has already been dead 4 days. 4 days is important, because 4 days means Lazarus was really dead. We have stories from the ancient world of people going into tombs and then waking up a day later. Cases of a heartbeat too faint to hear. 4 days tells us this is not one of those times. Lazarus is really, truly dead. Jesus and the disciples show up at the town, and Martha is the first one on the scene. I love Martha. In the event of death, Martha, I imagine, she's the doer. Martha is the one who does everything. She answers the door, answers the phone, takes the casseroles, washes the dishes, talks with the funeral home, makes sure the eulogy goes in the paper. At other times, Martha is scolded for being the doer. But when someone dies, have you experienced this? We all thank God for our Marthas, because we wouldn't make it through without our Marthas. As the doer, Martha is the one to greet Jesus. As the doer, Martha is the one to confront Jesus. "If you had been here," she says, "my brother would not have died." As the doer, Martha still wants a solution. But I know that even now, God can do whatever you ask. As the doer, Martha still wants something to be done. Yes, says Jesus. Okay, what about me? Says Jesus. I could be the solution, says Jesus. The answer is in me, in who I am, says Jesus. Do you believe this? Asked Jesus. But Jesus, Lazarus is already dead. What can anyone possibly do now? If Martha is the doer in the face of death, then Mary is the feeler. When Martha says Jesus is nearby, Mary just waves her hand and says, you go. I don't want him to see me like this. Mary is the one who stays home. Mary is the one who slumps in her chair. Mary can't stop crying. Mary's in a fog. Mary hasn't washed her face for days. Mary reminds me of my friend who, when she was diagnosed with cancer, put on her bathrobe and didn't take it off again for 2 straight weeks. Mary reminds me of my friend who, when she had a miscarriage, sat on the back porch of her step and bled and cried. Mary is the feeler, powerless, helpless in the face of death. And maybe she's more relatable because, let's face it, we're all helpless and powerless in the face of death. What else can she possibly do? Martha comes back to Mary with these beautiful words. Mary, honey, the teacher is here and he's asking for you. And there's something about these words, something about this idea that Jesus is here and he's asking for you. By the way, if you're here and you feel like you are under a fog this morning, these words are also for you. Jesus is here and he's asking for you. And these words, something about these words just fill Mary with sudden strength, and she gets up out of her chair and races out the front door. Mary runs to Jesus with the same words as her sister Martha. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But unlike Martha, for Mary, there is no discussion. There is nothing to be done. She merely blurts out these words and falls to the ground and weeps all over his feet. When Jesus sees Mary weeping and then looks up and sees a multitude of other mourners also weeping, do you know how Jesus feels? Do you want to know how Jesus feels? The Bible tells us how Jesus feels. The Bible tells us that Jesus felt angry. I know perhaps some English Bible might say he was deeply moved in spirit, but the Greek word that John wrote here is embrimeomai, which means to be deeply moved with anger, to be outraged, to roar with rage. When Jesus saw Mary weeping and all these other people weeping, first of all, he was angry. And some commentators can't understand this, but when I think about it, of course he was angry. Because it is completely normal to feel angry when someone dies. Haven't you also felt angry in a time of grief? Angry at the doctors, angry at cancer, angry at heart disease, angry at miscarriage, angry at the person who left you, angry at being left behind, angry at COVID, angry at death. And angry is what Jesus was. Jesus wasn't just looking at Mary's wet face, and he wasn't just looking at all these other people's wet faces. In this moment, he was looking in to the face of death, and he hated what he saw. Where have you laid him? Jesus asks in a rage, and they lead him to the tomb. And at the sight of the tomb, his rage collapses in the way it so often does. His rage collapses like a wall of a dam collapsing. His anger gives way to a flood of tears, and Jesus bawls his eyes out. Some people say, look at how much he loved Lazarus. But other people say, well, why didn't he get here earlier when there was still something to be done? Jesus arrives at the tomb. Standing at that grave, he feels that anger rising up in him all over again. Embrimaomai, outrage. Greek people say that it is the sound that horses make when they are getting ready for war. Roll back the stone, says Jesus. Jesus, we can't do that. Roll back the stone. Jesus, you're asking us to desecrate this man's grave. Roll back the stone. Jesus, it's going to stink. Roll back the stone. Did we not tell you he's been dead 4 days? He's not just dead, he's decomposing. Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? The crowd is silent. A few guys reluctantly step forward to push the stone aside. Jesus looks up to heaven and says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you will always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe you sent me. And Jesus looks down into the dark black hole that is that grave, and everyone else peers down there with him. And Jesus takes a deep breath, and Jesus says, Lazarus, come out. In 5th grade, my school had a whole school talent show. My best friend in 5th grade, Susie, decided for the school talent show she would bring her dog, a toy poodle, and have her poodle perform a bunch of commands that it had learnt. But when Susie's dog was on the stage in front of 270 children and dozens of adults, it was hit by a certain special toy poodle stage fright. And it didn't matter what Susie asked the dog to do, the dog just sat there and did nothing. Pebbles, sit. Nothing. Pebbles, come. Nothing. Pebbles, jump. Nothing. Pebbles, roll over. Nothing. And so in a last-ditch attempt to save the entire talent show, my friend Susie resorted to what she told us was her dog's most amazing trick. And now, says Susie, my dog is going to eat grass. Only in 5th grade do you think your dog's most amazing trick is to eat grass. And Susie unrolls her hand and presents before us all this handful of grass. Pebbles, eat the grass. But the dog does nothing. Pebbles, eat the grass. But nothing. Eat the grass, Pebbles. Pebbles, eat the grass. Nothing. Pebbles, eat the grass. Pebbles, please, eat the grass. Nothing. Pebbles, eat the grass. Eat the grass, Pebbles. Nothing. And so all I can remember of this 5th grade talent show is this ridiculous, desperate, fruitless command. Pebbles, eat the grass. Pebbles, eat the grass. Pebbles, eat the grass. Lazarus, come out. No. Can it really be? And there is Lazarus. Lazarus bound at his hand and his feet. Lazarus with a cloth around his face, but you can see the cloth moving in and out. You can see that he is breathing. Lazarus reaching out his hands, Mary, Martha, Jesus. Lazarus, fresh as a baby, fresh as a new-born bud of spring. Undo the cloths, says Jesus, and take this man home. In verse 45, at the end of this story, we read that men and women in the crowd that day, the people who had come all over to comfort Mary in her grief, went back to their homes, and the Bible says they chose to believe in Jesus. I can see them now going home, eating supper, putting on their nightgowns, snuffing out the bedside candle, and lying awake in their beds that night, thinking to themselves, whoa, if Jesus could raise Lazarus from the dead, I mean, maybe he could raise my mum from the dead. Maybe he could raise my sister from the dead. Maybe he could raise my friend from the dead. Maybe he could raise my baby from the dead. Maybe he could raise my husband from the dead. Maybe he could raise my nana from the dead. I mean, if Jesus could conquer death for this one man, maybe he could conquer death for us all. And if they were thinking like that, they were right.